Okay, nice. My name is Ramirez. I'm Frogbear, and you can call me Rami. Now, I've reached a nexus point in all of my research where I have now. All I'm missing now is a connection to Hillary Clinton, and we all know what happens when you end up with that question in mind, right? So, I'm going to avoid um, finding that connection as best as possible, right? So today's video is going to be about the connection between the British, the Vatican, and psychiatry. This is very important. Um, so this kind of starts off with the funny story of after doing a bunch of research, I decided to watch something else for fun. But in watching something for fun, just led me into more of my own research. So I'm going to play the video. This is can't remember his name. His last name is Lufus, which I thought was hilarious. But he wrote a book called The Unholy Trinity. Gonna let him speak now.
They raised my security clearances many levels above top secret. My job was to go through all the CIA and NATO intelligence archives for several years to see if I could find any clues to where there might be Nazis hiding in America. Well, I never did get my free trip to Germany. Instead, I got lots of free trips to Suitland, Maryland. Now, Suitland is a nice little town. It's right outside Washington, D.C., and Suitland is where the U.S. government buries its secrets, literally. There are 20 storage vaults underground. Each vault is 1 acre in size. Have you ever seen the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark? Well, the last scene of that movie is what the underground vaults are really like, only not as organized as they are in the movie. And being a typical man, I didn't always stop and ask for directions. And one day I got really lost and ended up all the way down in the Q vault, where our nuclear warfare documents are stored.
This leads into my very first part of just a document that I stumbled on, which is called, if you Google it, you'll end up with this, which is Google had a project where they decided to scan all of like documentation that was in universities. So this is coming from the library, Ohio State University, which is the semi-annual reports to Congress. It's the index. This was stamped, received in 1951. These reports are dated from January 1947 to January 51. This is the Atomic Energy Commission Board. Now, of course, people are going to be like, how do these dates relate to MKUltra when MKUltra was supposedly started in 1968? Well, it's kind of, and I found another report again. It's just me finding, this is the one I'm going to link in the description below. But this leads into Marlborough Churchill, the person who was largely in charge of the Josiah Macy's Foundation, right? Remember this? He was, later operation would fund leading Nazi eugenicist Ernest Rubin from 1928 throughout the entire 1930s. Again, timelines are very important because I found this, which is an ERI feature, British Psychiatry from Eugenics to Assassination. And this document just essentially lines out, again, General Marlborough, who later became U.S. military intelligence. Remember, he's related to Winston Churchill, they're cousins. And here he says, where is it? Post World Federation for Mental Health and director of the Tavistock Institute. He's talking about Dr. John Rawling Rees. Dr. Ernest Rubin, Swiss psychiatrist who headed the Rockefeller-sponsored Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Munich. Remember, they're very important people that are all circulating around the same idea, the same concepts that were developed in cybernetics. What I largely am starting to suspect is that they needed very specific scientists in order to push forward the science they discovered in cybernetics. Because they realized that the people that they were inviting to cybernetics had morals, they had ethics. If they wanted to do any human experimentation, I don't think it would have been done by any American how do I say, doctors, American researchers, I don't think they would have allowed for that. But again, I'm just making the connection that if you look at the Atomic Annual Report, and if you type out Josiah Macy's Foundation, you would find this, which this is just an index, so essentially describing who were the people involved in all of this. The Josiah Macy's Foundation was somebody who sponsored a lot of this stuff. But back to what he was saying.
And inside the nuclear vault, I stumbled across a group of Nazi files, files that I wasn't supposed to see, files that no one was supposed to see until the year 2015. And I discovered, much to my embarrassment, that many of the Nazis that I had been assigned to prosecute were already on the government payroll. It was one of those Cold War operations that got all messed up.
It was one of those Cold War operations that got messed up. No, it wasn't. The fact that they were trying to hide these documents inside of the atomic energy vault sector portion of whatever vault he's in, they've planned this from the very beginning, right? They already had a scientist in mind. They already had people in mind that were going to head these really weird human experiments from 1930. They already had the Tavistock Institute working alongside a Nazi scientist. And keep in mind that if I go into this article, it says here that Rubin heads the Eugenics Federation. The British-led eugenics movement met an American museum at the Natural History in New York City and designated the Rockefeller Dr. Ernest Rubin as the president of the Worldwide Eugenics Federation. The eugenics movement at the time called for the killing and sterilization of people whose hereditary made them a public burden or a national scapegoat. And this was in 1932. The very next year, who took power? Anybody got any guesses? This was planned thoroughly. Thoroughly. Either way, to the next clip that I got here prepared. Let's mute myself.
Now, the State Department couldn't destroy all the top secret Nazi documents because it literally takes too much paperwork to destroy a top secret file. But you can misfile them. That's why all the Nazi files ended up down in the nuclear vaults, where no one was supposed to find them until
I think it's hilarious. Where nobody was supposed to. No. I think the reason why this was all labeled underneath nuclear, atomic, whatever word that they were using, was because it was a very new science, right? Anything related to radiation, anything related to radioactive material was considered a national security. It's why, by and large, we're at war in the Middle East, is because this is a capability that we deem very necessary, that we've made it a very top national security issue. So I'm suggesting that there were very key players that used that as an excuse in order to propagate and push forward all of these really weird experiments and label them underneath this because it gave it the highest amount of clearance. So basically, don't ask, don't tell. And if you had scientists that were willing to ignore morals, ethics, and, a use of psychology in order to get people to do what you wanted to, this is how you would do it. You would disguise it all underneath authority. But I digress. I still got more.
I was stupid enough to stumble across them some 4 decades later. And the British government asked the new Reagan administration, which had just come in, not to let me investigate any more cases like that. Much too embarrassing to the British government, because if they open up the Nazi files, that's going to lead to the Vatican, then you're going to have to deal with the Nazi gold and where the Nazi money went. And that would lead back to Americans as well as British. So, the British said, use our 75-year censorship rule.
75-year censorship rule. Does that sound familiar to anything that's happened in the recent past year? Any guesses? And I find this incredibly hilarious that nobody's figured out that what's going on today with the medical industry, with what's going on today with the abuse of authority that the medical institution has, Nobody's put two and two together at all. And again, it gets worse when you kind of understand what the Tavistock Institute were looking into. If you understand what cybernetics was really about, you would understand that you could have used the model of the world that we have today, right? Keep in mind, using the model of the world we have today, essentially map it out as a system science. Map out how we verify information, verify how, or create a systems of how we interact with each other, how we communicate with one another. And when you map out that science and you map out our stimulus, when you map out our behavioral trees, right? That's why I showed that video of kind of putting electrodes on your brain, figuring out all of the stimulus from senses of smell, touch, taste, feel. I'm sorry if you can hear the car going off. I'm going off hella hard here. With all that in mind, keep it in mind the timeline that this is all occurring in. The eugenics movement by 1939 completely failed in New York at the ERO office, but it didn't fail psychologically. Whatever they discovered through psychological means, through the cybernetics tours, through whatever they were doing at the Tavistock Institute, it gets much worse. Because there's this other video that I found that talks about body snatching and how the US government was looking for literally the documentation literally says, like, we need to figure out ways of body snatching for the use of science. So you had people literally stealing babies, stealing dead bodies, all to test what would happen if they radiated the body to see if anything would happen. And this body snatching incident wasn't just exclusive to the United States. They got people from Australia, Canada, the UK, Jamaica. It gets so much worse. And you want to know what's funny about all the countries that I just named? During the time that these studies were occurring, all of those territories were underneath the British Crown rule. And then I'm like, whoa. This is far extending anything that I was actually imagining for it to extend to. Hence why I'm at a situation where the last thing I need is to find a Hillary Clinton connection. Oh, wait. Who was the person that disseminated all this information? Who was the person that created a special investigative body in order to figure out all of these really weird experiments so that they could find all the psychiatrists, to find all the doctors, and either shut them up or get ahead of the declassification story in order to black out anything? Who was the president that did that? Oh, it was Bill Clinton. Like, realistically, I don't need a connection that gives an incentive to the Clintons censoring all this information. I don't need that. At this point, I'm like walking such a thin line that I feel like Epstein a little bit. But, you know, I love life. I love what I'm doing. And finding all this information out is very, very beautiful. But think about it. This isn't just something that is within the bounds of one nation, that is within the bounds of one ideology, one religion. This was a global effort to figuring out human behavioral science. Or at least this was the early conception days, right? This was the 1930s. Which is why I bring up all of the inconsistencies. He found these files, you know, what was this, 75 years from 1980? Either way, I'm getting too close to that truth. And to end this off, do I have one more clip?
Looked at some of the famous American names who had been innocently involved with this freedom fighter project. I knew it would be a huge scandal, but...
Hold on. There is one more. 3426. Not that smart. 3426.
You know, if there's one thing that all of us, Republicans and Democrats, can agree on, is that Nazis are bad. And we have always suspected that someone was pulling strings. And I think what we have had is a series of multinational corporations behaving like pirates. And they have no ideology. They don't care about America. They don't care about Nazi Germany. They only care about money. But what do I care? I'm not a Jew.
They only care about the money. And if I remember the ERO report that I read, it was essentially to discover a way to stop labor unions, a way to make people complacent with what they were given. That's how all of this started, because essentially they wanted to breed a cultivation of a generation that was subservient to whatever they were doing. Don't ask questions. Don't investigate me. How dare you? Like, that's literally these people and how they're behaving with everything that they're doing. But, you know, again, I do not feel the any least bit depressed. If anything, I feel invigorated. It's amazing, though, to discover how all of this just kind of ties in together. But my name is Ramirez, and that's today's episode. I don't think I'm going to do another episode because I'm in the process of changing my sleeping pattern and changing my workout routine because I have access to a sauna now. And there's this whole thing that I'm trying to do with the fasting and all this other stuff. Way too complicated for this video. But thanks for watching. This is going to be the only video for today. And hopefully you learned something very serious today.